All right. Good morning. By some miracle, we actually made it this morning. And welcome to another edition of the Free American Hour, folks. I am Clay Douglas. My guest today is Gary Hunt from the Outpost of Freedom, someone that's been in this patriot movement, at least as long as I have, huh, Gary? How are you?
Long time.
You know what got me started on this? Let me just ask you real quick. What got me into this? I mean, after I discovered that the CIA was bringing all the cocaine into the country, I saw what happened at Waco, and I was outraged about it. So I went out and started the militias and started the Free American magazine. And I seem to recall seeing your name pop up all around the stories and the investigations on Waco.
Well, my involvement in the Patriot community, I guess, began like a lot of people back in the 80s with the Internal Revenue Service back about 1981, but then in 1993 I started a newspaper called the Outpost of Freedom. I was a land surveyor, had my own business, and was actually published 2 editions before Waco, and I went to Waco and reported out through Ken Varden's American Patriot Fax Network during the entire course of Waco. I got there on March 5th and stayed until April 22nd, so I was one of the few Patriot reporters, I think the only one that was there that nearly the entire period.
And I was in Miami at the time, watching it on television. I swore to my wife I would never sit back and watch something like that happen again, without trying to do something. It was like, I'm screaming at the TV, "Where's Texas Rangers? Where's the DPS? Where's the Highway Patrol? Where's the sheriff? Why are they letting them do this?"
Well, while I was there, I went down to Austin and spoke to Maurice Cook, the commander of the Texas Rangers, and he was kind of appalled at what was happening, but he said, "We can't do anything. The federal government's in charge there." The Texas Rangers, the Texas State Police, McLennan County Sheriff, and the Waco Police Department were all deputized by the FBI.
So they were working for the feds, which is exactly what they've accomplished with these fusion centers, isn't it?
Well, that was before the fusion centers, but they did have to deputize them on the spot. The fusion centers are creating a closer relationship between them, and so is federal funding. 1994, the Crime Control Act of 1994, you might remember it as the Cops on the Street program. That gave federal money to local law enforcement to put another cop or 2 on the street, but it also tied them to the Justice Department as a subordinate. So yeah, a lot of steps have been taken to bring the local law enforcement, all levels, into compliance with the obedience, I should say, to the federal government.
That the fusion center sprung out of that. Was it Senate Bill 1959, House Bill 1955 on homegrown terrorists? So the Missouri Fusion Center down there, they put out a little bulletin. If you got a Ron Paul sticker on your car, you might be a potential terrorist.
Well, part that bothers me is veterans might be. I'm a veteran. That's kind of scary that I might be a homegrown terrorist. I thought the homegrown terrorists were working out of Washington, D.C., not Arizona and California.
Oops, I lost you there. You broke up there, Gary.
Like you and I.
Yeah. Okay, got you back.
Had an act of terrorism at Waco. Was that an act of terrorism at Waco?
I think so. And what's really disturbing to me right now, in retrospect, I call it something like deja vu. It was the BATF that attacked the Branch Davidians. And this is an American church that had been established for 50 years. It had been there in Elk, Texas for 50 years. And the BATF attacked it. And that's the same agency that's now supplying the guns to the so-called Mexican drug dealers, who I believe are really the CIA. And I believe the CIA is bringing all the drugs in here, all the heroin in here, all of the cocaine in here. And, of course, we've got our troops guarding the opium poppy fields in Afghanistan that those nasty old Taliban were destroyed. But this BATF supplying guns to a foreign country to drug dealers, and now we find out they're laundering their money. What's who's the you're absolutely right to bring up the point. Who's the terrorist here?
Well, I think I know, and I think you know, and I think most of the listeners probably have a good idea who the real terrorists are in this country. When local police departments come out in combat gear, and apparently right now they're able to buy half-tracks and all kinds of military vehicles for their police departments, I think I know who they are. Now, I've started studying English history from 490 AD when the Anglos, the Jutes, and the Saxons went from the coast of Denmark to England. And, I'm up to Queen Elizabeth now, and there was this theory that the king can do no wrong. And this was a constant menace to the people in England through that entire period. The phrase, the king can do no wrong, was repeated through history over and over again. Now, when the colonists separated from England, it was because of that, the fact that the king thought that they could do no wrong regardless of the English Constitution, that they caused a separation and set up the form of government that we've got now in hopes of getting away from that. But if you look at it, we've come full circle. We're back to the king, or the government can do no wrong no matter what they do. The soldiers in the Boston massacre stood trial for the shooting civilians. The BATF and the FBI and U.S. Marshals at Waco did not stand trial to be judged by the people. They were judged by themselves, which means the king can do no wrong again. We have come full circle.
You know, one 4th of July, I read the Declaration of Independence, and all I had to do was change the Indians to the Mexicans, and it sounded like if somebody wrote it yesterday.
Well, I think my favorite phrase in the Declaration is the one that says, when invariably the object invariably is to form a despotic government, we have a right, we have a duty to cast off that government and form a new government that will serve our needs. And honestly, I think that's where we are. We need to consider the Declaration of Independence and the fact that we have come full circle and move into that position that the founders were in when they said, no more, that's enough. You're not going to do this to us, we're going to strike back.
When the Declaration, when the Department of Homeland Security came out with their latest assessment that was basically pointing the fingers at veterans. I've got that the whole thing in my book, Mystery Babylon. They were pointing the finger at veterans. They pointed the finger at the militias. The ADL told everybody, there are a few million people out there, they convinced them that Clay Douglas was some kind of right-wing extremist because he started the militias. He helped start the militias. He advertised for the militias. My question when the news called me to ask me what I thought about the militias being brought up again in and the veterans being brought up in the assessment, my question was, what part of the Second Amendment don't you folks understand? The ADL told you I started the militias. They didn't tell you that I did it in the governor's office, that there wasn't any terrorist organization, and nobody in the militia blew up Oklahoma City. But they turned it into a massive propaganda piece, and they've tried to do the same thing with the sovereign citizens. They killed a man and his son, same way they killed Vicki Weaver and Randy Weaver's son. You know, and without a trial, without nothing, is this becoming this? And we got the so-called Muslim over there that they killed too, but he was an American. I mean, they assassinated an American because he happened to be a Muslim. Just the same way they assassinated 17 little children whose parents happened to be Christians. What's going on here, Gary? I mean.
Well, under the kings and queens of England, at least they had the courtesy of putting them in the Tower of London, holding a trial, and then cutting their heads off or hanging them. We don't have that courtesy anymore. It has gone actually worse because there is no even pretend trial held nowadays before people are killed for their beliefs. It's gotten out of hand. Now, you read the plan for restoration of constitutional government and posted it for me. That is a draft. The final version isn't done yet. I've got a couple articles to add to it, and then I'll be putting it out in the PDF form. But I've studied American history, especially the colonial history, extensively. And after Waco, I went back to Florida and started wondering how the founding, you like I, Clayton, felt that we should stand up against the government back in '93.
Absolutely.
So I started looking at how the founding fathers accomplished this, and I ran across something that I had vague recollections of from a movie called Johnny Tremaine by Disney, where they talked about committees of safety. But I started looking into it, and committees of safety were not only interesting, they were instrumental. We would not have become the United States of America had it not been for the committees of safety. The committees of safety called for the first Continental Congress in 1774. The colonies responded to that by establishing committees of safety. Now, committees of safety was a concept that goes back to the time of Cornwall, the 16th century in England. And it is a civilian body that becomes the civil government. Now, the militia goes back to the Magna Carta. And the militia has to be subordinate to a civil authority, as you know. And you were in the governor's office. Now, the militia has to be subordinate to the governor of the state or the colony. But when the royal government refused to abide by the English Constitution, for example, Worcester, Massachusetts, in May of 1774, declared independence from England and released all the militia, re-enrolled them except Tories, recommissioned the officers, and even set up courts to deal with criminal matters. The Committee of Safety became the de facto and de jure government of Worcester County, Massachusetts, before Lexington and Concord. And this happened all across the colonies, and there were over 90 declarations of independence before Jefferson put pen to paper. These committees of safety then became a transitional government from the British government to what eventually evolved into the Constitution. And so I wrote this, the Plan for Restoration of Constitutional Government, modeled after the what the founders did. Now, the difference that I realized is the playing field has changed. For example, back in the 1774, actually back to 1762, during the problem with the tea tax, or the various taxes, the committees of safety began forming and standing against the British government, the misdeeds of government. But in doing so, they had demonstrations in the streets. Now, they got away with these demonstrations. They tarred and feathered people, they humiliated them in public, and they got away with it. But the playing field has changed, because back then we didn't have a standing army. Now, people misunderstand the concept of standing army. The law enforcement, the 1 million men in law enforcement in this country today, constitute the standing army that the founding fathers feared. We have a standing army now, so you couldn't go up to the tax collector's office and drag him out of his office, strip him naked, tar and feather him, and then put him in a cart and take him down the street. You'd have armies of military equipped policemen protecting his office, so you could never even drag him out. So the playing field has changed considerably. And the plan considers these changes in the playing field and goes through 10 parts that would restore constitutional government to this country. Whether it will work or not, only testing it will test whether it will work or not. But as Patrick Henry said, why do we wait? We know where we're going. We know what's happening, but we sit supinely. Understanding the elusive phantom of hope. We keep hoping things will change. And every year it gets worse. We might win occasionally in getting a bill not passed by Congress, but look at the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party candidates went to Washington. 2/3 of them supported the extension of the Patriot Act. 2/3 of them supported the increase in the debt ceiling. So there is no political solution. There's no judicial solution. The courts have been corrupted. The grand juries are facing the wrong way now. Initially, the grand juries were a way of keeping the government in check. Now they're a way of indicting people for non-crimes and getting them sent to prison.
Well, Ayn Rand had it, and I think this has been going on for a long time. You just kind of touched on one of my favorite subjects. You know, back in the Ayn Rand said, government has no control over honest citizens, so they have to make criminals out of them. And we've got more people in prison in this country right now than any communist country out there, and more than Russia had at the height of its occupation.
During the gulags, yes.
And the same people are running the gulags, and the same, you know, well, I mean, my God, it costs if they put me in prison for having a little bit of hemp, you know, because it might have a little bit of THC in it, they could put me in prison for that, take away my rights, take away my right to own a gun, and put me to work in a slave labor camp where they're paying them 25 cents an hour to build things for private corporations.
Enough to keep you in cigarettes?
Yep. And of course, if you smoke cigarettes, then they don't have to take care of you that long. You know, life sentence gets shortened a bit. But they're making money off of us. They're making money off of us, and they are enslaving us. There's even been talk about renting out our prison populations to other countries for slave labor.
Well, if the king can make some money off of us, why shouldn't he? Since we've returned to royal government, unless we rebel against that government. And that's the whole focus. Now, you got the notice the other day that the state of Arizona, an historical first, all the colonial states had committees of safety. During the Civil War, I know at least some southern states had committees of safety. There are, however, two very prominent states that had committees of safety after the Civil War. First was Texas, where the committees of safety sent their delegates to San Felipe. They elected Austin as the chairman, and they assigned their militias to the authority of what became the Republic of Texas. So committees of safety played a role, a significant role. The de jure government of the Americans in Texas in the 1830s. California in 1850, between the invasion by Fremont and the acceptance of state, was actually run by committees of safety. Its period was a lot briefer and there was a lot less activity, but the committees of safety did muster militias in California. So the two republics that entered the Union, the two states that became republics of themselves and then voluntarily entered the Union, Texas and California, both had committees of safety as part of the transitional government from the Spanish government to the acceptance of states in the Union. So the Arizona, never being one of them, which was bought under the Louisiana Purchase and some treaties with Mexico, has never had a committee of safety until December 2nd, 2011. They finalized their formation after 5 meetings of the Arizona Committee of Safety, elected some interim officers, and began establishing committees with the purpose in mind to provide for the safety, protection, security of the lawful inhabitants of Arizona, especially in those areas where the federal and state government have failed to provide such protection. All activity is to be in adherence to the Arizona Constitution and the Constitution for the United States of America.
Now, I just put on an event or at least planned it for somebody to benefit Sheriff Deaver here. Now, he's one of the sheriffs on the border in Cochise County. He's spoken to Congress about the illegal alien situation, and course, they tried to slow that down. Gee, Clay, we heard that you sent out an email said the event had been canceled. Why would I do something like that? No, that never happened. And but the sheriff, Sheriff Richard Mack, has been a friend of mine for a lot of years, and he's organizing the sheriffs in a committee of constitutional sheriffs. This committee of safety would be working probably hand in hand with the sheriffs of every county, wouldn't they?
If the sheriff's true allegiance, not the false allegiance, but the true allegiance was to the constitutions, they would be working hand in hand, yes.
Yeah, well, you've got the Sheriff Dupnick here in Pima County that thinks the
obviously doesn't fit that role, does he?
Doesn't fit that role. He thinks the bad guys are the radio talk show hosts, you know.
And veterans in their homes.
Yes. We went to that. I went to that march at Guerreno's home there, and got to see his widow and you know, the Oath Keepers, who have also been demonized. Stuart Rhodes started the Oath Keepers. They're a little afraid of me because I do talk about Israel. I do talk about the Zionist connections, and but that doesn't mean I think everybody that was whose grandmother was Jewish is a bad guy. I don't believe that. And
well, Mike Fry, the chairman of the interim chairman of the Arizona Committee of Safety, is an oath keeper, and he told me that he's been talking to Stuart Rhodes, and Stuart Rhodes likes the idea of committees of safety because that would become the infrastructure.
Yes.
Now, if Sheriff Mack comes on board, and if you talk to him, you know, I'd be glad to explain the committees of safety to him. If he would support it, to get support from these larger organizations to pursue the same course the founders did, our historical course in getting rid of bad government. As we come together, the committees of safety do become that infrastructure. They are the civil authority that directs where the militia will go to fight. That's the role they played back then. In fact, on committee.org, www.committee.org, down at the bottom, near the bottom of the main page, you'll see a book that was written in 1904 by Agnes Hunt, no relation of mine, about the provincial committees of safety. Now, she dwelt strictly with the provincial committees. They were the state committees of safety. She does not, except alluding to occasionally, talk about the local committees of safety, which actually predate the provincial committees of safety. But in that book, she explains the role that the Committee of Safety took in the various states. If the governor was friendly, they worked hand in hand as the executive of the state. But in states like New Jersey, where Ben Franklin's son was a Tory and was governor of New Jersey, they took over the role of sole government of New Jersey. They were the executive. They replaced the governor as the authority, civil authority in New Jersey. So this concept, as you can see, has a way of filling in where the government fails. Whenever the government fails, if the sheriff's good, he's incorporated into the Committee of Safety. If he's bad, he's excluded from the Committee of Safety within that county. So it's a rather interesting concept, and as I started studying in 1993, it is just phenomenal the role they played in the creation of this country.
They did a pretty good job of demonizing me and demonizing the militia, and now they've gone after the veterans. They've gone after Stuart Rhodes. They've gone after the Oath Keepers. I mean, I have a real hard time understanding why, when everybody that from the militia, everybody from Oath Keepers is standing up saying the same thing. And I've asked the FBI, you know, why should we have any differences? We both took the same oath. Why are we looking at each other as enemies? What's happening with this whole? You mentioned the Tea Parties, and the Tea Parties. You've had the McCain clones sent in, and urged the Tea Parties to go bomb Iran, for God's sakes. That's what we need. We really need another war. We need to bring China, Russia, and Iran and their Iran's trading partners. We need to bring all of them into this. And use some of these atomic weapons that we've been storing for the last 150 years or 60 years. But the Occupy movement, Now, on the positive side, both the Tea Party and the Occupy movements have gotten people out of their lazy boys and into the streets, and carrying some kind of sign or taking some kind of activity in this. But on the bad side, what it looks to me is happening is that these things are being staged with provocateurs on both sides to put the police against the people and set the whole tone for what's coming with these detention centers. What do we spend $350 million on detention centers for if we don't have anybody in them?
Well, we can't fill them. We'll pass some laws to make sure they get filled. Unlike motels, they can create a captive audience for the detention centers. In fact, the increase in, let's say, crime in this country, especially victimless crimes in a free country. My grandfather used to say each man has a right to his own poison. That should be true in a free country. Now, there are some moral crimes that might be punished, but they would have to be moral crimes without a victim to be punished, and that goes through our history. They had you remember when everything was closed on Sunday, and it was actually a crime to run a business on Sunday. That was moral. That was in violation of the moral values of the country, where the seventh day was a day of rest, and that goes back to colonial times. But now, playing poker in your own home can be a crime. Using herbs that God gave us can be a crime, but alcohol's not, and alcohol's a deadly, but it's controlled by government. Government makes money off of it. Alcohol's a deadly drug. Marijuana's not a deadly drug, but alcohol is.
More people have died of aspirin than marijuana. I wrote a book about marijuana being legal in this country sometime in the future. I hope I was talking about next year.
Well, in 1970, I was one of the formers of the California Marijuana Initiative, and nobody wanted to register to vote then because they didn't want to sit on jury duty, but we lost the initiative that would have made marijuana like salt and pepper by 4 million to 5 million votes. And that was, 41 years ago. But it didn't work. But yes, I'd like to think that that crimes without victims go back to where they belong, become non-crimes.
That's right. If there's no corpus delicti, there ain't no crime, folks.
Actually, I think injured party is the crux of the whole criminal process. Like I said, though, certain moral crimes were considered crimes and would be punished, but those were, for the most part, left locally. They were never federal level. Some states imposed laws. For the most part, cities or counties impose moral laws. Cities impose prostitution laws, drinking laws. I was working in Georgia in 1969 as a surveyor, and we were working in one town, and it was a dry town. Actually, it was a dry county, and it was coming on Christmas, and we had to drive 15 miles to get a beer to a wet county. So the moral laws were isolated by counties at least back then. And I think in the south there are still some dry counties. I'm pretty sure there are. I know there are a lot of places that restrict sales of alcohol, like Pennsylvania restricts sales of alcohol. You can't sell alcohol on Sunday except in clubs. You can't. There are certain restrictions, time of day. So those might make sense. But when you get away from those, then we get into the absurd, absolute obedience to the king. And that's what we've got to get away from.
Yeah, we even write songs about that in Texas.
Well, 5 minutes past the time, 7 of them crammed into that truck of mine.